This is Jeffrey Tucker from the American Institute for Economic Research, and I am here. Hey, we're doing our first big public hangout, I think, from the office with one of our associated scholars. Really glad to have him here. This is my old friend Gene Epstein, a man of very high intelligence and stature. You know, for years, Gene was the economics editor at Barron's, and he cranked out a column a week after week, about economics, not just finance, not just I don't know, whatever, but economics, and a good scholar in that respect, and then came out with a wonderful book actually on government data, which is a fascinating thing. Gene's slightly obsessed with the topic, but just how do they collect it? What does it mean? What can we interpret from GDP figures and that sort of thing? So I'm having Gene on right now because I think Gene has made a singular contribution to our times by. But with a coinage of a phrase, which if you've ever tried to coin a phrase, you would know that it's actually extremely difficult. Like you try to coin a phrase, nobody cares. This time we care. So Gene Epstein, I welcome you, and let's talk about the great suppression.
Well, absolutely, and thanks for that build-up. And I want to say back to you, Jeff, and also to the guy who runs AIER, Ed Stringham, that I was sort of present a few years back when Ed was tapped to take over this venerable institution. And I actually visited. My wife and I stayed at that huge manse, and she got a little freaked out at the ghosts in the place. And then I was telling Ed, I don't know if you're moving fast enough to get this organization really functioning and producing, and I have to eat crow and certainly congratulate Ed. I guess he moved a little bit more deliberately and slowly than I thought he should, but perhaps he knew what he was doing. You now have, with you running a lot of the show, I congratulate you and Ed for an organization that's producing a lot of very good content, a lot of insights. I know your fingers do the walking. I get emails, I find out you guys are producing something, and I go to it. And I really, I do think that AIER has put itself on the map under Ed, and certainly with your help, as a go-to place for libertarian insights. So I congratulate you. Yeah.
Well, these are fascinating times to be in this business of research and writing, publishing, and education. I mean, obviously, we're facing a intellectual challenge like we never have before, both in economics and in the whole subject of the study of markets. So it's been a little bit mind blowing. Can you just talk? I mean, I want to hear just I'm a little hesitant even to curate what you want to say, because I know that this has been an extraordinary time for you. Can you just talk about what it's been like?
Oh, okay. Well, talk personally. I was about to talk about the Great Suppression.
No, that's what I mean. Like intellectually, personally, just watch this all unfold. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, the Great Suppression is an attempt to sort of watch it unfold from on top. So I can get a little bit into my personal odyssey, and I'll get to the Great Suppression in a moment. I left Barron's, basically stepped down. I was negotiable. We left Barron's after a quarter of a century in January of 2018. And I've been doing articles, and you published a piece of mine, and then running my SoHo Forum much more actively, and doing a lot of debates at my own SoHo Forum. And what's of course jarring, we in defiance of maybe all sense, we had a SoHo Forum on March 9th, our last one, and we sold out our venue. And then, in fact, we declared sellout, and then people were coming in on standby. And so we had a full house for a debate between Richard Epstein and Tim Wu on a topic that now seems a little bit quaint, but having to do with antitrust and big tech.
Yeah, that's right. Then I sent a few people there. I sent a few of our staff, or a few of our staff were there. Yeah.
And then of course, my mantra is that the SoHo Forum has a twofold mission, not just to host one-on-one debates, which I think are important to think in terms of about issues of interest to libertarians, but also the second is that we've got a bar. It serves wine and beer, soft drinks as well. Out is people in the same room, and that's been great. We have a party starting even before the SoHo Forum debate starts. You've been there a few times. You've graced their presence, schlepped down all the way from upstate to attend our debates, and then afterwards, of course, the debate ends about 8:15. And then we have about 45 minutes of people hanging out and talking. They could talk about the debate. Lots of us approach people in a bar, they're talking convivially, and we get an anxiety attack, socially awkward people. But I thought, well, when the debate has happened and people can talk about the debate, that's an icebreaker, get to know each other that way. So, of course, this has been hugely upsetting to me that we had 2 debates scheduled in April, and of course we shut them down. We had a huge debate where we had to hire a much bigger hall scheduled on foreign policy between William Crystal and Scott Horton, and we've had to postpone that. And then now I'm apparently stuck in my loft apartment. My wife is Sacco. I speak to her 7 times a day and on FaceTime and so on, but she fled to the country. And so now I'm all alone in my loft apartment. But of course, I obviously have social media. I've got you to interact with on Twitter. I do some interviews. So it's not been that bad for me. But of course, it's just wrenching to see what's going on. So that of course is anybody's story. And I go to Whole Foods. Whole Foods does age discrimination. You show up at Whole Foods between 7 and 8. You show the policeman your driver's license. And the policeman, I guess, to do the mental calculation to know that you must be over 60. I'm still alive at 75, so I guess it's an easy calculation because it says 1944. So he will only let we oldsters in. And the Whole Foods is very sparsely populated with oldsters, very easy to get in and get out. And then when I walk out, I find that the under 60s are patiently waiting online to get in once they are allowed in at 8 in the morning. So that's the experience. And of course, obviously, to walk the streets of New York that used to be so teeming with people, that is, of course, deeply unsettling. So that's my personal story. But then you were asking me about the idea of calling this not the Great Recession, not the Great Depression, but the Great Suppression. And I do think that it's an appropriate term, mainly because I like to talk to my fellow Austrians, my fellow libertarians, and I do want to tell them that this economic contraction is really not a conventional Austrian business cycle contraction. It's clearly just by government edict. It's simply the government suppressing the SoHo Forum, a healthy investment, a healthy enterprise. It's not malinvestment gone awry and collapsing and then spreading its toxicity to the rest of the economy. It's actually mostly good investment. It's the SoHo Forum, for example. It's the barbershop that I frequent. Good investment, viable investment, being forcibly shut down by government edict, and that's a very different kind of recession from the Austrian business cycle recession, which normally is what hits the U.S. economy and other economies. So I'll shut up for a moment. Maybe you have a comment about that.
Well, what's fascinating about this is that it's not just the onset of the downturn, which I mean, there was a healthy debate going on in earlier part of this year. What are the likelihood of a recession? Is the stock market overvalued? The kind of things that people talk about all the time. And from my perspective, it didn't seem to me there was anything about to go tremendously wrong anytime soon. I mean, just because the expansion of the last 10 years, there's nothing, Hegelian about the word 10, that causes it to, or however long it is, 20 or 30, that causes the economy to tip. It's not as if, the economy runs out of steam and falls into recession. So there wasn't, at least to my mind, any evidence that anything was fundamentally structurally wrong.
Well, yes.
So,
Well, let me elaborate on it because, of course, you said, perhaps you're aware, Jeff, that you said something that is a highly contentious statement in the eyes of many of our intellectual cousins whom we have a high regard for. I won't name them. People who do think that the economy was spoiling for recession, and many of our Austrian friends. And indeed, I guess I'll cut to the chase and say that with respect to the bubble, there is a bond bubble. There is definitely a bond bubble. Why is it a bond bubble? But it's a bond bubble of government debt, mainly of federal debt, of U.S. Treasury debt, and it's piling up. And why is it a bubble? Because interest rates have been unusually low, and obviously the simple math of bonds is that when interest rates are low, prices are very high, and when interest rates begin to rise, those prices are going to collapse. What are the numbers? The cost of servicing the U.S. Treasury debt has been about 1.5%, 1.5% to 2%, a little less than 2%. Historically, the cost of servicing the nearly 20 trillion Treasury debt has been 6%. 6 times, nearly like 5 times greater, 4 times greater. And so and then the Congressional Budget Office, just a strictly mainstream organization, has simply said, let's imagine that in 10 years, that interest rate goes up to 4.5%. Not even to its historic average of 6%. That's going to mean a potential fiscal crisis. But that government bond bubble, I contend, could burst very quickly, but most likely the air will come out of it very slowly. That's what I've been saying for about a year. Getting to the other point, which is that I check the usual suspects, and I admit that the usual suspects are not always the only crimes, but the usual suspects are housing and the stock market. The conventional measure of price-to-earnings ratio shows that the stock market conventional price-earnings ratio has been about 21, 22, much lower than 30, than the bubble level of 1999 and 2000. So you see frothiness in the stock market, but no real bubble, certainly nothing compared with 2000. Similarly, any measure of house prices shows that I could go into that. House prices to rents, which I could calculate, house prices adjusted by conventional measures of inflation, shows that there too, there's nothing like the housing bubble of 06-07. So I just wanted to elaborate there. Because I think that a lot of our friends out there are going to say, we're just, head in the sand, free market types. We don't see that the U.S. economy really was headed for a fall. The fact is that I don't see it, and I did indeed expect that. Just as you say, there's nothing sacred about 10 years. Honestly, ironically, there used to be, the mainstream can occasionally say, the expansion is getting tired, like it's somehow. Like it's not it's not like the economy is not just collective group of people who retire, who enter the workforce, who rise and fall. It's not a person. It's not. We hopefully we Austrians can understand that economic activity consists of decentralized groups of businesses and individuals coming and going, doing their thing, and they don't get tired in the way that an individual does. So again, elaborating on that point, I agree with you. And I'm surprised, I guess, that I didn't really know that you tended to agree with that viewpoint.
No, I don't agree with that viewpoint. It was, in the early days, at the onset of this whole thing, I was on a television show with Peter Schiff, and who's a dear man. I mean, some people disagree. But I like him. He's a fun person to hang out with and whatever.
You should see the way he cuts a wicked rug on the floor and on the dance floor. He's an incredibly fun person.
He's a very fun person, and I love him. But
not to take my eyes off the beautiful dame. He usually is twisting around the floor. But
we all know her very well. The mother of his children. But
is she really? Yeah, is that the mother of his children? I didn't know that. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, if it's not, we don't need to be talking about that. Anyway,
I apologize. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
In any case, so we're on the air, and I guess the Great Suppression had just sort of started to get going, and he was going on about how this wasn't really associated with the virus, it wasn't associated with government actions. This is a bust up; it's just waiting to happen. And of course, he's a perma bear, right? I mean, I think in 2009 he wrote a book called something like The Next Crash. So this is he sees himself vindicated. But I don't want to jump all over. Schiff, by the way,
okay, you don't want to jump, but honestly, Jeff, okay, I told Taylor Lab School, look, Peter has his own private. Look, I envy him. It's fascinating. Have you ever visited that enclave down in Puerto Rico where he lives with Yaron Brook and others? You do feel like I feel like a chump living in New York City. Peter and Yaron pay a 4% tax on their income, living in that enclave in Puerto Rico. That's that story.
Yeah, that's news to me. I mean, Peter and I used to hang out in Brazil. I didn't know he has a summer home in Puerto Rico.
No. More summer home. No. He's got a summer home in Connecticut. In order to qualify for the tax advantages of being a Puerto Rican resident of Puerto Rico, he has to live there like 8 to 9 months of the year. He only comes to Connecticut in the summer and maybe to feed him. No, but you have to be down there. You have to maintain your residence. Maybe it's 6 months. He's got to be down there. But anyway, that aside, I like him personally as well. But look, the fact is that Peter, unfortunately, has become associated with being the spokesperson of the free market / Austrian school. And I only want to, and I do want to call him out of school, but look, you called him a perma bear, which is damning enough. Because obviously every once in a while the economy does expand, so that's bad. The other term for it is a stopped clock. The stopped clock is right twice a day.
Sure.
But he's, one of my problems with him is he's terribly dishonest in the softball interviews that he gets in talking about his own track record. In January of 2016. He said we're going to be hit by a major recession before the presidential election. He went on record saying that. But then when he starts reviewing, when he gets the softball interview, starts reviewing his record, he cherry picks. He says, I was a little wrong as I expected that. But he glosses over it, and that's bad. And unfortunately, I have to puncture Peter's reputation only because, again, he's gotten far too influential as the spokesperson of the free market school.
Yeah, but look, you hang around Austrian circles long enough, you're going to find out that actually there's a diversity of views out there. There's the perma bears and people who think a little more with a little more precision, and and that's always been true in this sometimes odd Austrian world. But Gene,
Sure.
Here's what's obviously you called this the Great Suppression because half. 2/3 of American workers, maybe it's more now, have been forced to, under various media intimidation and local state edicts enforced by the police power to stay home, not go into their businesses, not run their businesses. That we have a central planning regime. It's like, you're essential, you're not essential, which is I read the regulations from the state of Massachusetts the other day, and I was absolutely astonished. I don't know if you've ever read any of these things. To decide what's essential and unessential, as if the economy is not one big connected network, and so on. So the fact that there's a downturn is hardly a surprise, and I like that you have another name for it besides recession and depression. Suppression sounds right. But now let me ask you something. I wonder if this has struck you.
Sure.
So at the same time, we have Congress and the Federal Reserve engaged in stimulus policies. Now, what could this possibly mean? I mean, there's no economy outside of people. You've got everybody sitting at home, twiddling their thumbs, not knowing what to do except to watch the Tiger documentary on Netflix. And now we're going to stimulate what? I mean, don't you have to have something to stimulate if you're going to stimulate? But what could this possibly mean? I mean, there's no such thing as some sort of meta-economic layer that's independent of people's productive efforts. Am I right about that?
I believe that's basically correct. And the point is that where we have to ask ourselves about government money. We have to ask ourselves not about the idea of stimulating. We're talking about potentially life rafts. We're talking about simply survival money that maybe some people can use. So in other words, stimulating, I mean, the term stimulating and stimulus does seem a little bit ridiculous, because clearly there's no, as you indicate, it leads to this fiction, this myth that they're actually stimulating economic activity. Clearly, they're not, except in the very limited sense that I guess if somebody who has no savings just gets a check in the mail, that person can engage in the economic activity of going to the store or paying the rent or just surviving. But I think the term stimulus, I would want to choose a different term, but definitely I'd have to agree that it is economic activity when a purchase is made from a retail store. It is economic activity when a payment is made on rent. So there is something to that. However, the term stimulus is sadly inappropriate to capture what it really is. But it's definitely, there are people in distress, and their business is in distress, and then if the government is sending them a life raft, that's something else again. But it's not, I would not call it stimulus. I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we should call it compensation. If government's engaged in a taking of your property, which is essentially what's going on here. The Fifth Amendment would imply just compensation. I mean, ideally, this wouldn't come at the expense of other taxpayers.
Yes, but also it would not. And the other part of it is clearly because it's Trump. That president you hate, and of course we all hate him, and to varying degrees. You of course have been a stand-in, I think, in this respect, and I thought there was an interesting divide between those of us who can't quite hate him the way you do, and that's another. I can't quite hate him. Isn't it true that you would bill yourself as among libertarians as probably one of the most prominent Trump haters? Is that right?
Okay, Gene, I'll accept that. I mean,
I respect that.
No, with one qualification. I don't hate him in the way in which he's hated by most of his opponents. I'm against him for. It was actually one of the really frustrating things for me during the first term here is that I'm really against a ton of his policies, but all the people who are against Trump are against him for oftentimes what he's good on. I mean, so it's been frustrating, right? And the things he's bad on, nobody really talks about, which is mostly trade protections and the immigration issue, and also just thinking of the nation as some sort of one big corporation. I just can't stand that kind of thinking. To me, I've called it right wing collectivism and stuff. In fact,
okay, but you know what? You actually you attended my debate with his flunky,
Oh yeah.
Steve Moore, and
that was great.
You liked my presentation well enough to ask if you could publish it, and which you graciously did. Yeah. And then the hard part for me was that I did think I've done six SoHo Forum debates, five SoHo debates, and 105. And I thought Steve is more. It's Oxford voting. You vote before and after, and the person who moves the vote in his favor wins the Tootsie Roll. And I thought that Steve is so on the ropes. He doesn't have a fact. He's just he's almost half time agreeing with me, and then I was stunned that I picked up a lot of votes, but he picked up more. And I thought, my God, I guess he visited the president that day, and I just was surprised that he visited the president that day, and Trump was delivering a State of the Union address that very evening. So I thought,